Imagine standing on a lonely shore at night, the waves crashing, the stars hidden, and your ship lost in endless darkness. Then, far in the distance, you see it. A single flicker of light, trembling in the wind, but steady enough to guide you home. That lantern by the sea was no ordinary flame. For centuries, before GPS, before compasses, before towering lighthouses, these fragile lights saved countless lives. They whispered to sailors, "This way, you are not alone." But what if I told you the sea whispered back? That waves glowed with their own mysterious light, answering those lanterns in the dark. Tonight, we'll uncover the forgotten story of the lanterns, the keepers who guarded them, and the waves that spoke in return. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. A coastline, quiet and endless, with nothing but the sound of waves tumbling over the shore. The night is heavy, a velvet black sky draped above, and the stars twinkle like scattered shards of glass. The moon floats somewhere far away, pale and distant, its silver light spilling faintly across the water. And then, there it is. A glow. Faint, fragile, but steady. A lantern. Its flame bends with the wind, but does not break. It trembles like a heartbeat, alive, reaching out into the vast darkness of sea and sky. For sailors, that lantern was more than a light. It was hope. Imagine you are far out on a wooden ship, tossed back and forth by waves that roar like beasts. The night clouds cover the stars. The compass needle swings wildly, and you cannot tell whether you are moving toward safety or drifting into danger. And then, suddenly, you see it. That tiny, quivering lantern flame. You know there is land. You know there is safety. The light may be small, but to you, it feels as if the entire world has just spoken, whispering, "This way. You are not lost." That is the power of a single light in the dark. But the lantern story is not only about guiding ships. It is also about the people who tended it. Somewhere on that lonely coastline, there was a person, or sometimes a whole family, who took on the responsibility of keeping the flame alive. Night after night, they climbed the rocks or the tower. Night after night, they refilled the oil, trimmed the wick, and shielded the flame from the wind. They knew that sailors depended on them, that lives hung in the balance of that trembling glow. Think of how tiring it must have been. The nights were long, often freezing cold, with storms shaking the earth itself. Yet the flame had to burn. Imagine the keeper's eyes heavy with sleep, their hands stiff from cold, their mind tempted to rest, yet they forced themselves awake because they knew the truth. If the lantern died, hope might die with it. Somewhere out in the waves, a sailor's fate could change simply because the light went out. There is something deeply human in that, caring for strangers you may never meet, people whose names you will never know, simply by keeping a lantern alive. It is a story of quiet service, of sacrifice, of believing that even the smallest act can make the biggest difference. The sea, after all, was never kind. It was both a provider and a destroyer. For villages by the coast, the ocean brought fish, trade, and new journeys, but it also took lives. Families stood on cliffs waiting for loved ones who never returned. Wives listened for the sound of sails in the wind. Children searched the horizon for fathers who would not come home. The lantern was, in many ways, a comfort to them too. It was their way of speaking to the sea, of saying, "We will not give you everyone. We will protect who we can." And yet, even as the lantern shone outward, its light seemed to shine inward as well, reminding people of resilience, reminding them of care. To tend a lantern was to believe in something greater than oneself. Some legends say that the flame itself held a kind of spirit. In old villages, children whispered that the lantern's glow was a living soul that talked with the waves. When the sea crashed against the rocks, it was answering back, carrying the voices of sailors who had once been guided home. In this way, the lantern became not just an object, but almost a character in the story of humanity's relationship with the sea, a humble flame standing against the vast, unstoppable dark. Now pause and think about this. How many times in history has a sailor looked up from his storm-battered deck and prayed for light? How many times did that faint lantern, barely seen in the distance, save a ship full of souls? And how many times did the keeper, alone on the cliff, wonder if the flame they guarded so carefully was seen at all? It is a haunting thought that across centuries and oceans, countless lives depended on a single, trembling lantern. Yet it is also comforting. It shows us that even in the grand scale of history, with empires rising and falling, sometimes the quietest, simplest acts, like keeping a flame alive, were the ones that truly kept humanity safe. The flicker in the dark was not a grand invention, not a mighty fortress, not a king's decree. It was a lantern, humble and fragile. But to the sea, and to those who braved it, that small flame was more powerful than an army. And so, the story begins. A lantern by the sea, a conversation between light and waves, and a reminder that hope can shine even in the deepest night. Long before the grand stone towers of lighthouses appeared, before engineering and glass lenses amplified light across miles of ocean, the world's coastlines were wild, untamed, and unforgiving. Imagine sailing in those times, on ships made of wood, with sails that creaked under the weight of wind. Navigation relied on the stars, but clouds could hide them for days, leaving sailors blind in the vast expanse of water. The coast, which we think of today as a place of safety, was often the most dangerous part of the journey. Hidden reefs, jagged rocks, and shallow waters waited like traps just beneath the surface. And yet, even in this danger, people found ways to protect one another. Across the world, communities turned to light. Families who lived by the sea would place large iron braziers on cliff edges and keep fires burning throughout the night. These were not lighthouses in the modern sense. They were bonfires on poles, lanterns hoisted up tall wooden masts, sometimes even entire piles of burning wood left on high hills. In Northern Europe, such fires were called beacons. They were more than just a guide for ships. They were also signals for villages inland. When danger approached, when invaders crossed the seas, chains of beacons would be lit one after the other, like a fiery message passing through the night. Imagine standing in a valley and looking up to see flames erupting on a hill far away, only to turn your head and see the next hill catching fire as well. Light was both a guide and a messenger. In monasteries by the sea, monks took turns keeping watch. Records tell us of abbeys where brothers prayed as they tended the flame, believing the light to be not only practical but spiritual, a symbol of divine protection over those braving the sea. In ancient Greece, villagers climbed rocky cliffs with oil lamps, holding them aloft during storms. They believed that if the gods saw their devotion, they would grant calm seas. Whether or not the gods answered, the effect was real. Ships found their way home, following the glow of those tiny flames. Even in Japan, Long before modern lighthouses, there were stone lanterns set along shores, their fires meant to honor the sea and to call ships safely to port. Each culture gave the lantern its own meaning, but the purpose was universal: light the dark, guide the lost, protect the living. To think of it now is humbling. No electricity, no machines, no great technology, only human hands, carrying oil and wood, climbing cliffs, keeping fire alive. The world before lighthouses was a world where survival depended on something as fragile as flame. And yet, in that fragility, there was extraordinary strength. The sea is a restless storyteller, always speaking in waves and whispers. For as long as lanterns burned along coasts, people began to imagine that the sea answered back. On calm nights, the waves carried the light's reflection far out into the horizon. A sailor could look from the deck and see two lanterns, the one burning on land and the one shimmering on water. It was as though the sea itself acknowledged the flame, bowing its head in reflection. But storms told a different story. Sailors swore that in tempests, when clouds covered the sky and rain lashed against the deck, the waves glowed. Not from the lantern above, but from themselves. The ocean held a secret: bioluminescence. Tiny plankton and sea creatures, disturbed by movement, released light that shimmered blue and green. Imagine this scene: a sailor fighting fear, rain soaking through his clothes, thunder shaking the air, and then, suddenly, the sea itself glowing with streaks of living light. Entire waves outlined in blue fire, every crash sparkling as if the ocean had stars of its own. To those who did not know the science, it was a miracle. It was the waves themselves speaking, guiding, promising safety. In China, sailors believed these glowing tides were the spirits of drowned fishermen returning to help others. In Ireland, legends told that the sea whispered in gratitude to those who kept the lantern burning. In the Pacific Islands, glowing seas were considered a blessing, a sign that the ocean spirits were awake and listening. What is fascinating is how universal this belief was. Different cultures, thousands of miles apart, looked upon the same mystery of glowing waters and came to similar conclusions. The sea is alive. The sea is speaking. And in truth, whether explained by science or myth, it is hard not to feel that way. When the ocean answers a lantern's glow with its own shimmering voice, it feels like a conversation, fragile light speaking to eternal waves. As time passed, the world grew ambitious. Human beings, never content with small fires, dreamed of something greater. The lanterns grew taller, the flames brighter, the fires larger. Slowly, the first lighthouses were born. The most legendary of them all was the Lighthouse of Alexandria in ancient Egypt. Built over 2,000 years ago on the island of Pharos, it stood nearly 400 feet high, a giant of stone rising from the Mediterranean. At its peak burned a massive fire, its glow reflected by polished bronze mirrors so bright that sailors could see it for miles. Some said it was visible 30 miles away, an extraordinary distance for the ancient world. To sailors, it was not just a guide. It was a wonder, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In Europe, medieval lighthouses began to appear, stone towers with fires at their crowns. Later, in the 18th and 19th centuries, technology transformed them. Glass lenses, carefully curved, magnified the flame into beams that cut across the horizon. Oil gave way to kerosene, kerosene to electricity. The towers became taller, their beams rotating in great arcs, sweeping the seas like watchful eyes. But for all their grandeur, the heart of the lighthouse was still the same as the humble lantern, a flame tended by human hands. Generations of lighthouse keepers lived in solitude, their duty simple but heavy: keep the light alive. Through storms, through wars, through endless nights of loneliness, they guarded the flame. Some keepers spent decades in towers battered by wind and waves, seeing more storms than people. Their diaries, still preserved, speak of nights when the sea seemed determined to swallow both the tower and its keeper, yet the light never went out. Think about that. Civilizations advanced, empires rose and fell, ships turned to steel and steam, but the core remained unchanged. The light must shine. Even today, when ships have satellites, GPS, and radar, the lantern by the sea has not vanished. Lighthouses still stand, their beams sweeping calmly across the dark. Many are no longer needed for navigation, yet they remain as guardians of memory, monuments to an older time. To stand by a lighthouse at night is to feel history breathing. You can almost hear the footsteps of keepers climbing the spiral stairs, the strike of a match against a wick, the sigh of the sea answering back. The lantern has become a symbol. It is carved into literature, painted on canvases, whispered in poetry. It represents guidance, hope, endurance. A reminder that even the smallest light matters, that in a world often lost in storm and shadow, a single flame can change everything. And if you listen closely, truly listen, when waves crash against the rocks below, you might hear it. A whisper, soft but steady. The sea still speaks. It speaks to the lanterns of old, to the fires tended by nameless hands, to every keeper who ever stayed awake so that others might find their way home. The story of the lantern by the sea is not about kings or empires. It is not about conquest or glory. It is about care, about humanity's endless need to protect one another, even across distance, even across darkness. It is about ordinary people who became extraordinary, not by fighting wars, but by keeping a flame alive. And so, the lantern never truly went out. It burns still, in lighthouses, in memory, in every act of kindness where light is offered in darkness. It reminds us, as the waves remind us, that hope may flicker, but it does not fade. And so, the lantern by the sea never truly went out. It still shines, in memory, in lighthouses, and in every small act of light we give to one another. If this story helped you drift a little closer to peace tonight, I'd love for you to join me again. A simple like, a gentle subscribe, or even a quiet comment helps keep these stories alive, just like the lanterns once kept their flame. Until next time, may your nights be calm, your dreams gentle, and may you always find the light waiting for you by the shore.